All right, let me ask you a few questions and see who remembers anything from the other day. What three institutions did God institute?
Family, church, and state.
Okay. Why should we study government? Something deeper, please, than it's required for my major. Okay. Yes, Serenity.
God ordained it, and we have responsibility.
Okay, God ordained it, and we have responsibility. She saw both answers. It's okay. All right, two purposes of government. Jonathan.
To correct those that do wrong and to bless those that do right.
Okay, punish evil, correct those who do wrong, and reward, protect the good. And please, some people looked at that and said, oh, the government needs to, somehow, the best businessmen give them rewards. Really, I don't think that's the intent. A referee in a sporting event, I think, is the best analogy for us to think about. So, a fair ref in a sporting event. Okay, I should add that in there. So. All right, today we're going to look at a little bit of history, some historical things, where some of the ideas that come up in the Constitution show up. A lot of it comes out of English history, so we'll spend a little bit of time there. But there's a few things to mention before that. So the first main division I have in my notes is ancient civilizations. Just a few things to mention with some ancient civilizations where some ideas crop up. They first appear. So, all right, the first one is Hammurabi. Hammurabi, way back. Anybody know what he's known for? He's not a Muslim terrorist, even though it might sound like it. So, it's not. I want to say, what's your name? Jacob. I had it wrong.
I want to say he had some of the first written laws?
Yes, written law code. Right? There were prior ones before him, but a written law code, something written down where everybody knew what the laws were. It wasn't just completely up to the ruler to day by day decide what he's going to execute people for. There's some written, established decisions made. So, written law code. So, anyhow, we're going to be studying a written document this semester. So we have that. So anyway, it goes way back to Hammurabi and other places we can see a written law code. All right, the next is up to the Greeks. Anybody know what government terminology or idea comes out of the Greeks? Josh?
Was it an oligarchy?
Okay, they do have an oligarchy, but there's something they develop.
Democracy?
Democracy. Especially in Athens, they're the most famous for this. Now, they went to a pure democracy, which is extremely unstable. All right. And girls, no women voted, and it was still unstable. Okay, so it's truly an unstable setting when women not being part of it still creates instability. So it really is very, very unstable. A pure democracy where all of the adult male citizens voted on the laws. Every time there's a law that came up, they would have a big assembly and they would decide on the laws, rather than the people choosing representatives to go vote on the laws and that type of thing. A pure democracy or direct democracy they developed. So anyway, that is not a very stable form of government, but the idea of the people voting and participating, having a role to play, we get that there. So, all right, next ancient civilization to look at, and the last one is Rome. Greece. We get the democracy. What do we get from Rome? And I still forgot your name. Joshua? No. Jacob.
There you go.
Okay. The supplanter? Okay. All right, Rome. What do they do? Don't answer. Let's somebody else. Yes. Republic, the Roman Republic. Now, the Rome that is famous to us when we're studying all of the civil wars, the Republic is fallen apart by that point, and especially once you get to Julius Caesar and some of those things. Octavian in the Bible, Augustus Caesar in the Bible. By that point, it's an empire with an emperor. Not really. There's this form of republic. But before that, they had a real republic where the people voted, they elected representatives, and they had real roles to play in the government.
Wasn't it Plato that wrote the Republic, though? And he was Greek. I didn't know if that had any play.
He did write a book called The Republic. I've never read it. So I don't... It does deal with government philosophy. I really don't know if it goes towards this type of republic or... Not a bad question. I just don't know. Maybe we could add it to our reading list.
I'm good. I think you did, yeah.
Okay. But I'll thank Josh for that. So, okay, ancient civilization. All I do is bring that up just to say some of these, written document, representative republic, that type of idea. Our founders could go back and see this stuff being used other places. They did not. The one question, it wasn't just reason that brought them to these ideas. There was experience. They could look back and see how it worked. So, all right, the next thing, we have ancient civilizations. The next thing is the Bible. The Bible really was a source of political philosophy for our founding fathers. Except for Shem. I don't know if they used the Quran or the Vedas or whatever it is for the Hindus, or who knows what book they used. But the Bible really was. It was referred to by our founding fathers as the great political textbook. Right? Things in the Bible, again, if you read the Bible, hopefully you do, there's not a section in there, first and second government, where God lays out how to organize the government. But there are lots of principles that when you go to thinking about how a government should be organized, that bear and that apply to it. So the great political textbook. Let me give you a couple of examples of some of these ideas that we can pull out of the Bible that affect what the government should be doing and how it should be doing it. So, okay, the first one, man was created in God's image and likeness. Man is created in God's image and likeness. We are not just the products of evolution, some random chance. There's, it wasn't just an explosion in millions of years of random mutations that produced us. Now, I'm fully willing to allow scientists to claim that. I mean, all right, I believe you. You give credence to that idea. But that's not what we came about. We're created by God, right? I just have two things that this, as we think about government, produces or causes us to think about. First one, man has intrinsic value. We are important just because we exist. Anybody familiar with the terms intrinsic and extrinsic? At least in my classes, often it comes up when we talk about money. Currency with intrinsic value is something that's valuable in and of itself, like gold. And then our money has only extrinsic value. It only has value because the government says it does. Right? We have intrinsic value. God made us. We have a soul that goes on to live in eternity. Regardless of what the government thinks, we are valuable. Okay? If you're a socialist or communist, people aren't intrinsically valuable. Really, it's if you can't contribute, then you need to go away. Our president, way back before his wonderful health care package was foisted on us, talked about brought up the idea that some people might not be worth medical treatment if they're too old or something like that, rather than the family deciding, do we want to spend the money? There are times where it's too expensive and you just can't do certain things. But rather than the family doing that, the government was going to look at Devante and say, I'm sorry, you're not worth it. We're going to let you die. So his whole thinking was clouded with a non-Christian view of people. All right, there's not a soul there that's going to live into eternity that has value because God made it. If he can't contribute to society, why should we pay to get him fixed? Okay, so intrinsic value. Another idea out of being created in God's image and likeness is inalienable rights from God. We have rights that come from God. The government should recognize these, but it doesn't have the power to create them, or really shouldn't have the power to take them away. Inalienable rights from God. Hopefully that phrase, inalienable rights, strikes a little bit of a familiar code, or tone or note. All right, where do we see that that wording used?
Declaration.
Yeah, Declaration of Independence talks about we're created by God with these inalienable rights. All right, so just the fact that you take the idea that we're created by God, we get to ideas like that definitely affect what you think the government should be doing. So, you could think about other ramifications of that, even to the idea of how do we decide if we all have this intrinsic value and rights that come from God, then why does one person get to tell me what to do? I mean, if I have these rights directly from God, how do we choose that person? Does it, we have a big kickboxing match and the strongest, or you can draw from that the idea that, we all would have to consent to this person, some sort of democratic idea. So there's lots of ramifications to that, but here are just a couple to get us in the right direction. All right, the second principle or idea from the Bible, we have created in God's image and likeness. The second one is civil government is needed because of man's sinfulness. We need government because mankind is sinful. No, not us in here, we know we're good, but all those other people, they're wicked. Government is needed because of man's sinfulness. Let me read you some quotes here. Our founding fathers had a very high opinion of us. Alexander Hamilton, take mankind in general, they are vicious. This is John Jay. The depravity which mankind inherited from their first parents introduced wickedness into the world. That wickedness rendered human government necessary to restrain the violence and injustice resulting from it. Okay, so we see a direct connection. This is in Federalist Paper number 51, which I think I have you read. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. As soon as we pick some leader to go over us, he also has a sin nature, and he wants to amass power to himself. And we've got to somehow come up with a structure that does give us leaders that can make decisions and do things, but not allow them to accumulate power and become despots of some kind. So, all of that stemming from the fact that mankind is sinful. If you ever listen to a liberal or a Democrat, they're always, I say liberal because there are lots of Republicans that fit that category, and then there's Democrats too. If there's ever some problem, very often their solution is, well, we need a government program to fix this. We can't let insurance companies have anything to say about whether or not your medical coverage is paid for. We need to have a government agency to make sure it's fair. They're forgetting that the people that run the government agency are also sinners. Right? And once you get a government agency involved, you can't shop and go to a different company. I mean, if you don't like your insurance company, you can go to another one. But once we put the government in charge, we're locked in with a certain group of sinners. All right? And that controls them. So if you ever, next time you're listening to a crazy liberal, if you can remember, they're advocating always the government doing more and more stuff because other people are bad and evil and wicked. All right? The people in government are also bad and evil and wicked. All right? That's sin nature. So our founding fathers realized that. Both they needed to have a system to restrain the evil in people, but also a system that restrained the evil in the leaders. All right? There's evil both places. So civil government is needed because of man's sinfulness. I have a little star in my notes if you want to put it there after that. Those first two are two of the more foundational and core ideas that governed the thinking at the founding. I'm going to give you a couple other ones, but if you had to pick two, what were the two big ones, or what were the two most important ones? It'd be those two right there. That the whole, we're going to read the Constitution, and a whole lot of it is set up is just how they're going to set that thing up to try to prevent it from becoming some sort of absolute government. Right, going back to these two ideas. So, if you want to make a note there, that's fine. All right, the third one. Civil government leaders are ordained by God. God does talk about leaders being ordained by God and given to us by God, and that we should obey them. Just read an article. My wife showed it to me. It's about Nazi Germany prior to World War II. the Nazi Party issued propaganda and stuff telling Christians that the government said to obey that God said to obey the government, and if they resisted the Nazi Party, they were disobeying God. There is a point at which we disobey the government, but they were taking that point and twisting it. It's kind of funny to think about Hitler and the Nazis. I mean, atheists, they hated God, but they used the Bible to pummel the Christians into submission. So, but anyway, that is a true point. Civil government leaders are ordained by God. All right, another point from the Bible is there is a higher power than civil government. Hopefully, you don't wake up every morning and think, what does the government want me to do today? Please don't do that. But hopefully do wake up and think, what does God want me to do today? All right, there's something higher than the government.
Repeat that.
Yes, there is a higher power than civil government, or I mean, the higher power is God. I'm not trying to be vague about it. We're talking about God. He is higher. He is more important. So, all right, which brings up, I mean, just the idea that there are times where we need to obey that higher power. Okay, and that's if Mr. Armacost comes and tells me to do something, and Pastor Dameron comes and tells me to do something different, who should I obey? Pastor Dameron. He writes my paycheck. Right? He's the higher power. Okay, just this morning, my wife told Olivia to do something, and then I didn't realize what she said. I told her to do the opposite. And my wife's response was, well, obey Dad. Okay, he's the guy in charge of the house. So, and it's the same as with government. All right, there could potentially be a time in our life where we say, forget the government, we're going to obey God. All right, and it very likely is going to come. And we shouldn't get too bent out of shape when the government punishes us for disobeying them, but we have to obey God. So there's a power higher than the government, and that's our first responsibility. So, all right, one last one here. Government is not to be used to spread the gospel. That was, very common. The church and state were combined. If you got out of sorts with the state, you were in trouble at church. If you got in trouble at church, you were in trouble with the state. But the government was not the way to spread the gospel. So. All right, let me just read to you here some other quotes from some of the founding fathers, just all getting at the point that the Bible was an important source of political ideology to them. You don't need to write these down. I'd be happy to share them with you later if you want. But this is John Adams. As much as I love, esteem, and admire the Greeks, I believe the Hebrews have done more to enlighten and civilize the world. Moses did more than all of the legislators and philosophers. Hopefully Hebrews and Moses, that's the Bible. John Adams again. We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for a government of any other. Gets to other topics, but you can see the Bible being important. Thomas Jefferson, often looked at as the least religious and all that kind of stuff. No nation has ever yet existed or been governed without religion. The Christian religion is the best religion that has ever been given to mankind, and this is him as president. And I, as chief magistrate of this nation, am bound to give it the sanction of my example. Wouldn't that be kind of a shocking? President Obama get up and say, you know what? Christianity really is the best religion in the world, and I'm going to go to a Christian church to provide a good example. Think of the cries of violation of church and state.
He was one of the founding fathers.
Yeah, he was one of the founding fathers, and he was the sitting president at that time. So, anybody know what the First Amendment actually says? They always talk about violating the First Amendment. They would claim that's a violation of the First Amendment. It does talk about, that idea, but it says Congress can't do those things. It says nothing about the president. It says nothing about governors. It says nothing about states. It's a restriction on Congress and Congress only. But somehow our courts, in their great wisdom, have twisted that thing. It says Congress. So it was no violation of the Constitution for him as the sitting president to say, Christianity, that's the best religion in the world. And I'm going to go to a Christian church to be a good example. All right? It would... Someday when I'm president. It's going to be fun to ruffle some feathers. So. All right, this last one is by Alexis de Tocqueville. He wrote a very famous book about America. For Americans, the ideas of Christianity and liberty are so completely mingled that it's impossible to conceive of the one without the other. It goes on, there is no country in the world where the Christian, I think I might have missed a word, I think it's Christian religion, contains a greater influence over the souls of men than in America. Religion in America takes no direct part in government, the government of society, but it must be regarded as the first of their political institutions, for it does not impart a taste for freedom, it facilitates the use of it. I do not know whether all Americans have a sincere faith in their religion, for who can search the human heart? But I am certain that they hold it indispensable to the maintenance of republican institutions. Okay, so again, just that idea of the Bible and biblical philosophy was at the heart of our founding, regardless of all of the garbage we hear about today. It was at the heart of it. So, okay, so all of that was the Bible. That was one of the places where the ideas in the Constitution come from. So, questions on that? Yes?
What were the two foundational things?
Man is created in God's image, and civil government is needed because of man's sinfulness. We've come a long way from our president saying Christianity is the best religion to throwing clerks in jail that won't issue marriage licenses to two guys. Yes. All right. Next point. Unless there's questions. All right, we have ancient civilizations, we have the Bible. Now let's look at England. I forgot to pull out my documents here. I forgot I have some of the Code of Hammurabi here. And there's at least one of his laws I have to read to you. If a woman was not careful but was a gadabout, thus neglecting her house and humiliating her husband, they shall throw that woman into the water. I'm not really sure if that was execution or just kind of some sort of public embarrassment. but either way, I've always enjoyed the wording there. A gadabout. So. All right, England. Most of our, the colonists, people living here came from England. There were some from other places, but England was the primary source of people. Our founding fathers had direct ties to England. So we're going to see there's a lot that we get out of England, especially in kind of the nuts and bolts of how laws should work and legislators should work and things like that. We get a lot of that directly out of England. So, all right, the first place I want to look at is the Magna Carta. Anybody know anything about the Magna Carta? It was a great charter. Yes, David.
Signed by King John.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah, King John at Runnymede. Know the year?
1214.
Close. 1215. 1215. King John of England. Without getting deep into the weeds about how the government structure worked at that point, the king needed some troops for war, King John. And the way the arrangement was, the nobles under him were obligated to give him a certain amount of troops when it came time for war. He was obligated to do certain things to them. It was kind of a relationship both directions. But it came time for war. He's talking to the nobles under him that he needed their troops to go to war. And the nobles said, no, unless you sign this thing. All right, so they all meet there at Runnymede. I can imagine it's especially a cordial meeting where they, drank tea and sat down together. But the king was forced to sign this thing before they would supply troops for him to go to war. All right, so we get this thing in 1215, the king being forced to sign it. King John didn't do a whole lot to follow it. But later, through the years, it became extremely important to the English people, and they looked at it as kind of this foundational bedrock of some of their rights and liberties. So 1215. Let me just read some bits and pieces of this so you get an idea of the types of things that they were bringing up here to King John. This is the second main paragraph. We have granted to all the freemen of our kingdom, for us and for our heirs forever, all the underwritten liberties to be had and holden by them and their heirs, and us and our heirs forever. So they were saying, this document applies to us, to the freemen, and their descendants. Now, they are specifically trying to delineate two different groups of people. There's the freemen, and then there's the nobles. Right? There was not, all through here, we get different classes of society being handled differently. But anyway, they're saying this is something that goes on beyond just our lifespan. All right, dropping down to paragraph 12. No scutage or aid shall be imposed in our kingdom unless by the general council of our kingdom. We don't use scutage or aid too much, but basically it's taxes. No tax can be levied unless the general council of the kingdom, an assembly of, at that point, mostly just noblemen getting together to approve of. The king can't just arbitrarily raise taxes. All right, number 20, a freeman. Again, this isn't the nobleman. This is talking about the common people. A freeman, somebody who is free as opposed to, anybody familiar with the medieval social life? What would be below freeman? Serfs and peasants. Okay, it wasn't. They were a different class. All right. Freeman. A freeman should not be immersed for a small offense. That is not what they did to the women back with Hammurabi. Not immersed. Immersed for a small offense, but only according to the degree of the offense. Immersed is a fine. The fine has to only according to the degree of the offense. So you steal your neighbor's chicken. The fine has to match that, not like if you're in American history. Anybody in there? Talked about Draco, and every law was execution. Not quite that. So we have paragraph 20, immersed, talking about the freemen. 21, earls and barons shall not be immersed, but by their peers, and after the degree of the offense. 22, no ecclesiastical person, the clergy, shall be immersed for his lay tenement, but according to the proportion of the others aforesaid, etc. So a different handling there for the clergy. 28, no constable or bailiff of ours, there I think sheriff, police, that type of entity, shall take corn or other chattels of any man unless he presently give him money for it, or hath respite of payment for the goodwill of the seller. The government couldn't come and take somebody's property. Corn and chattels is basically any movable type furniture, a wagon, a horse, a dresser, not your house. It's talking about movable stuff. So the government couldn't come and take those unless they paid for it, or unless the owner, it says, by the goodwill of the seller, the owner is willing to take payment later. Okay, so the government can't just come and take these things. It's sometimes good as you read things like this to think, why would they have to put some statement like that? You think, of course, the government shouldn't just take something from people without paying for it. Well, they were, right? That's why they wanted it here. For you girls, no man shall be taken or imprisoned upon the appeal of a woman for the death of any other than her husband. So you could be the witness to a murder, unless it was your husband who was killed. Your testimony was worthless.
What could be the reason for that sort of a law?
Maybe they were smart. I'm kidding. Women had very few rights and privileges. I mean, they were not quite property, but close to it. They had very few privileges. Especially, this is 1215. So, yes.
So if I murdered Devontae, I'm 20 woman, they couldn't incriminate me?
Yes. If one of them happened to be married to Devontae, then you're in trouble.
Devontae, what are you doing today?
Never be alone with a bunch of girls. Right? You're in trouble. So, all right. Always read that one, mostly just for fun. I think it's interesting. Let me read you one more for real here. It's awful. Josh is awful, or this is awful? Both. Okay. Why do we want to murder Devontae? Come on. We've got Robert. All right, number 39. No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or diseased or outlawed or banished or in any ways destroyed. I think the last one is very kind of all-encompassing. There's all kinds of different punishments. Nor be passed, let me go on. The end of it says, unless by the lawful judgment of his peers. All right, so that trial by jury idea. And it's talking about freemen in this case. So and all those punishments can only happen unless his peers agree to it. So, and the point is, or I wanted you to see what types of things they were forcing King John to agree to here. Again, these things, we think, of course, the government shouldn't do those, but the government was. And that's why they were trying to rein the government in. So, questions about the Magna Carta? We can read Plato's Republic and maybe add some of these English documents, have quizzes over them. So, all right, let's go on here. Magna Carta. The second document here to look at in England is the Petition of Right. Jump ahead about 400 years. 1628 is when this is signed. Anybody know anything about this story?
Is it right as in R-I-G-H-T?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's. Yeah. Nobody knows anything? There's usually this one student who's studied English history and knows these names. So.
It sounds familiar, I just don't know.
Does this have something to do with the abolition? No.
No, that's a little bit later. All right. The king was King Charles I. Anybody know anything about him? What's that? There's a lot of people after him. Okay, Serenity?
Was it like with the sovereign right of kings? Or something like that?
Okay, he believed in the divine right of kings, that he was given right from God and these other people should not ever question that. He believed in that.
Was that like with the king's doctor?
Well, I was disagreeing with that, yes. So, anybody familiar or heard about the English Civil War? He was the king on the losing side of the Civil War.
Are we talking about the War of the Roses?
No. Just
Different Civil War.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Oliver Cromwell is the guy that comes out as the head of England after this point.
Oh, okay.
And Charles I gets beheaded. Okay, so they do eventually get his son back in as king after Oliver Cromwell goes crazy. So Petition of Right. He comes to the throne in 1625. In 1628, Parliament forces him to sign this petition. There's 400 years of time here, so now there's a parliament that's established that has some authority and power, and they had to approve of any tax increase. And Charles I wanted to raise taxes, so Parliament said, sign this first, and then we'll think about raising taxes. I wish our legislative body would play a little bit hard-nosed, all right, rather than they up front give up all of their abilities to rein in the president and then afterwards complain that they can't stop him. It's very aggravating. So, but anyway, here at least they held the line and said, we're not going to approve any more taxes unless you sign the Petition of Right. So 1628, he signs the thing. The next year he dismisses Parliament and doesn't call them back till 1640. So he does what he wants for a long time. Now, Parliament comes back in and we have a civil war and he gets beheaded for his actions. But initially, this, just like the Magna Carta, wasn't something that instantly gets put into place and becomes important. But rulers after him are obligated to look back at this document and follow it. So, all right, let me read you a couple of things here. I think I've got too much. A lot of this document is referring back to other times. You know, back in the reign of this king, this was established, and we expect you to still follow that. So let me read you a couple of examples. In the 5 and 20 year of the reign of King Edward III, it is declared and enacted that from thenceforth no person shall be compelled to make any loans to the king against his will. I just think, before in the Magna Carta, the king couldn't just come and take your property without paying you for it. Now the king would come and take your property and say, thank you for the loan, I'll pay you back someday. I mean, so saying the king can't take your property and just call it a loan. So that was established under Edward III. It refers to the Magna Carta, freemen cannot be taken or imprisoned, etc., that line we read. It was declared and enacted by the authority of Parliament that no man of what estate or condition he be, freeman, clergy, noble, shall be put out of his land or tenements, or taken, or imprisoned, or disinherited, nor put to death without being brought to answer by due process of law. Right? We hadn't looked at that term yet. Anybody know what due process of law means? Today, liberals talk about due process all the time. They misapply the term. But all it really says is whatever the legal procedure is, you have to follow it. Right? If the legal procedure was we arrest Shem, and we have like an empowered youth type spin wheel with all kinds of different offenses on it. And we let him spin it to see what he's guilty of. Right? I want to ask what you said. If that was the established legal law, the procedure, then that had to be followed. We couldn't just take Shem and throw him in jail. We had to let him spin the wheel, and then we throw him in jail. We had to follow the process. So that really is all that it's getting at, due process of law. All right, let me jump down to the end. Right at the end it says, it says, they do therefore humbly pray your most excellent majesty, that no man hereafter be compelled. And then they kind of list all of those things. They say, this is what's happened before in England, and we want you to abide by these same things. All right, so there's a few newer things. They talk about that thing that I just forgot about. Quartering of soldiers and some things like that come up. So there's a couple of new things like that are brought up, but mostly it's just kind of rehearsing English history and telling this current king that we expect you to abide by them. So, okay, petition of right. Questions there? Christina is just loving life right now, I can tell. I don't know where she was, but it wasn't here. So, all right, next one, the Habeas Corpus Act. This is just a law passed by Parliament. This comes in 1670. Habeas Corpus Act. 1670. Yeah. Anybody know what habeas corpus is getting at?
Is it like there has to be some kind of proof of a crime?
It's sort of.
Innocent to prove him guilty, or
No, not really that. Basically, the government has to come up with some concrete reason to just throw you in jail. They can't just arrest you and throw you in jail. They have to charge you with something. They've got to prove to a judge that there's some evidence, some reason for them to be throwing you in jail. We couldn't do what we said for Shem, just make up a charge and throw him in jail. It would have to be some evidence, some reason to hold them in jail. A person cannot be held in prison without a charge against him or a trial by jury. Can't just be arrested and thrown in jail. Anybody ever read The Count of Monte Cristo? There's two? All right, he gets thrown in jail, and if you remember the first part of the story, he's trying to remember why, and his friend starts thinking through why did you get thrown in jail? They eventually come up with an answer, but he was not charged with anything or told, just thrown in jail.
Isn't habeas corpus in Latin mean like having the body?
Yes.
Like they prove like we have the body, so I guess doesn't that prove that?
Sort of. I think I might have explained this wrong. I've been reading about it a little bit more. I think the habeas corpus, the body, really means produce the body of the person that's been thrown in jail. But either way, it gets to the same idea. You've got a living body, hopefully, Mary. So, like if Shem was thrown in jail, there's got to be a hearing where the government brings Shem and explain why he's being thrown in jail. That type of. So if you get thrown in jail, you can file a writ of habeas corpus and demand to be known. So either way, I've really heard it both ways, where it's the government has to produce the body, the person that was killed, that idea, some evidence, or produce the body of the person arrested. Either way. So, okay, so habeas corpus. That was 1670. Again, why would the government have to pass a law saying the government can't just arrest people and throw them in jail for no reason? Because they were doing that, right? They were doing that type of thing. So, all right, last one here in a rundown of England. We'll then, after this, flip and talk about America and some of the colonies. The English Bill of Rights. English Bill of Rights? I need a bigger podium. Or maybe less papers. Put them there. All right, English Bill of Rights. This was passed in 1689. (1689). Anybody know anything about this one? It was a document listing the rights of Englishmen, signed in 1689. All right, this is not that far after. If you really ever want to study an interesting time period of English history, the 1600s, there's all kinds of turmoil and chaos. We got all the mess with Charles I, and then Cromwell ruling, and then he goes crazy and they don't like his son, so they throw him out and bring Charles II back in, and then it doesn't go so well with his son, so they throw him out, and they ask a new king to come here in 1688. William and Mary from the Netherlands. Okay, there was a sitting king in England. Parliament didn't like them, so they went to William and Mary and said, "Hey, will you come and be the king and the queen?" So they did. There ends up not being any big fight here. William and Mary start to show up, and King James, not King James, King James II, I think. Yeah, he for a little bit acts like he's going to put up a fight, and then he flees to France rather than get killed. So anyway, they bring in this new king. And this document, the English Bill of Rights in 1689, was signed by William and Mary as they took the throne. Parliament saying, if you're going to come in and be the king, here's some restrictions and rights that the English people have. And rather than read down through here, I have a separate list here. The types of things that were in this thing, let me just read them off my notes. A king cannot ignore acts of Parliament. Parliament passes some law, the king had to acknowledge and live by it. Some of these you might think, well, these people are slow learners. We get the same idea again and again. Right? This next one is the same way. No taxes without the consent of Parliament. All right, third one, the army, no army could be maintained in time of peace without the permission of Parliament. You know, if there was a war going on, then the king got greater latitude and authority to establish an army and fight. But in times of peace, it wasn't up to him to decide how large the army was be. Parliament had the final say on that. The fourth one, freedom of speech in Parliament cannot be taken away. People could speak freely as legislators and not be held accountable other places. You can, talk about treason and, killing the king in Parliament, and the king cannot have you arrested elsewhere. So freedom of speech in Parliament cannot be taken away. Excessive punishments and fines and bails were prohibited. A little bit nebulous what exactly is excessive, but all right, two more. The right to petition the government was guaranteed. I keep picking on Devante and Shem. The government comes and takes Sarah's glasses and doesn't pay her for them. She can file petitions with the government to get reimbursed for that. And the government can't just say, no, we're not taking petitions. It has to be accepted. So. All right, and then the last one, Parliament would meet frequently. All right, Charles I, his plan was get everything I want from Parliament and just send them away and never call them back. It was up to the king to decide. Now they were establishing regular meetings of Congress. The king cannot just arbitrarily say there's not going to be Parliament. So regular, frequent meetings of Parliament.
What was that first one? Was that the first one?
Yeah.
The king could not ignore acts of Parliament. Okay, so a lot of freedoms and liberties here being established in England. Before we stop, we're not going to start into America today, other than just to make a few observations. Somebody think about the dates, especially of the Petition of Right and afterwards. Think about those dates and what's happened in America. It's easy to look back at those things and think, okay, that happened way back here, and then America came on the scene. and the colony started, but think about the dates. And somebody make an observation. It doesn't have to be intelligent, just make an observation. So, Josh is wanting to, but he'll share. When was Jamestown? If you don't know that, then it's hard to make this observation. Anybody want to answer that? 1607, Pilgrims. 1620, and now look at some of the dates. Right? There were colonies established here when they execute Charles I. So it wasn't, these weren't ancient rights and liberties that the people in America our founding fathers were saying are being taken away from. These things were established, many of them, after the colonies were here. Right? So to me, that makes it more real. It's not, they weren't going back to 1215, the Magna Carta, and saying, hey, what about these? Many of the people that came across, they were alive when the Petition of Right was signed, or they would have been hearing news of Charles I getting beheaded, or William and Mary coming in. When we talk about, it wasn't CNN or something like that, but that would have been, breaking news. England fires their king. There were people in America hearing that news and being told that they were Englishmen who had the same rights and privileges as if they lived in England. I mean, the colonial charters talk about that over and over and over again. Right? So when these things start getting taken away from them, it was something much more current, much more real to them than just some document from 1215. So, all right, questions at all?
Will we need to know the dates for the test?
No. So, those of you that need to take the quiz, I'll put it in the library, and you can just take